Was asked to present to you all, thank you for recording. When I was asked to present to you all, I really struggled with finding kind of a topic because first I've presented a lot of our work before to the society. It's a lot of work that we've done over the past 8 years that I've been running Skip. And so some of this is not new for some of you who have kind of followed the work that we've been doing at various conferences. So when I thought about what would be useful, not just to you all, but maybe myself as well, I thought maybe just reviewing the work that we've done through a lens of, impact and whether it's actually leading to change would be helpful. So today's guiding question for me, and that's going to kind of shape this presentation, is how can the practice of system dynamics, this very intense modeling effort, and specifically community-based system dynamics, foster real-world change in communities that face persistent poverty? So this is from the context of St. Louis, Missouri. If you know us, we are a small city in the Midwest. We used to be one of the biggest cities in the United States. We were projected to grow way beyond even Chicago. We were supposed to be bigger than that. And we have persistent poverty all across kind of the region. And so a lot of the work that we do at Skip has to do with these issues of poverty and specifically in K through 12 situations. So part of this work will be reviewing this through the lens of Whose Model Is It Anyway, who was developed by Peter Hovmand, Laura Brennan, and Nishesh Shalis. They presented this in 2011, which was a long time ago at the ISDC conference in Washington, D.C. But the groundwork still remains, and I think it still guides kind of the things that we think about when we talk about community-based modeling. So I'll talk a little bit about this idea of whose model is it anyway, and the idea of boundary objects. Then we're going to review this framework that I'm toying with in terms of measuring whether impact is happening and why it's happening. And then I'll share some thoughts moving forward and some tools to support it. And then, like Dave said, we'll work on some AI stuff together, which I don't know. We have thoughts on. I have thoughts on, feelings on too. So, if you have seen me present in the past, you know that I love this this quote by the lovely George Box, whose hand is on his cheek in that corner. He's a statistician, and he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And this is a very famous quote. When I first came upon it, it made me feel really good, like, okay, all models can be wrong. But I think as time has gone on, and I've been in this practice a little bit longer, I've come to the realization that that's not good enough. Because if all models are wrong, it kind of gives us a cop out to kind of do the work, maybe not to the fullest potential that we could. So in this Venn diagram, we have models that are wrong and some models that are useful. And, that's the ideal that he's shaping for us. But a few years back, I started saying all models are wrong, but some are really, really wrong. And it's a very eloquent way for me to say that we're often kind of in that really, really wrong space. And that's kind of where the CBSD, community-based system dynamics practice started is, sometimes the people who are creating the models are so far removed from the actual circumstances that are happening in this phenomenon that they're trying to study. So the models end up being not just wrong, but they're really wrong, and they're not useful at all either. So we're often sitting in that Venn diagram on the right side where it's just really, really wrong. This is kind of where that CBSD framework of let's ask everyone who has lived experience of a system to tell us their side of the story of a model. And I think that was good enough for a bit. But I think where I am right now is that all models are wrong, but some are really wrong and they're used anyway. And I think this is a really dangerous, dangerous area to be in, is when the models that seem useful were really created with kind of the right intentions, the right inclusion of people, but they're still not maybe technically accurate in reflecting real world challenges. And so we might use them thinking that they're actually going to help us solve a problem, but they're not necessarily doing anything but possibly leading us the wrong way. So I think that danger zone is often kind of it's hard to know when you're going to get there or how you're going to get there. So the idea of this framework is really just to figure out how to get out of that danger zone where we are not in the really wrong, but we're in the models that are useful and the models that are wrong, kind of the bigger area instead. So that's a tension in CBSD and community-based system dynamics where you have people on the ground who you want to support as a modeler. They have their own objectives, their own agendas, their own timelines, and usually it is very different than the timelines that you might have as a modeler. So I'm thinking about all the projects that we've had where, you enter, this space where people are like, I really want to use this method to help me solve X. And then they ask, like, how long will it take? And they're thinking like 3 months, maybe 6 months max. But often in the modeling space and the way that even academia works, our models take forever. And not just forever, I mean, realistically, like 2, 3 years for it to be pretty good. And so this tension of like, well, the community wants this, but then the modeler needs that is something that is persistent in the community-based system dynamics field. And so I think that's why we see a lot of models that are just good enough, maybe qualitative, helpful for insights, but not necessarily going the full kind of realm to a simulation, to find counterintuitive, phenomenon, that sort of thing. So what is community-based system dynamics? Since some of you already know what it is, I'm just going to briefly point out that it's a participatory process. It involves community members in the development of system dynamics models through group model building. So basically, you're gathering people in a community together. They're going through that process and they're building an SD model essentially at the end. The benefits are that you garner nuanced insights from those with real lived experience in a system. You also build agency with a community, and then you increase engagement for recommendations and the actual wherewithal for them to follow through with them because they have like some ownership of this model. So what is a lived experience expert? I've talked about this a bit. This comes from the medical field. This is a term that actually describes the way that they think about testing pharmaceuticals. So in pharmaceutical land, you don't test a pharmaceutical on someone and then not ask them their symptoms. Like you ask them what happened, what experiences did you have after, like, and they jot all that down and they try to take note of what the lived experience was. And we're taking that concept and embedding that in the work that we do in CBSD. So Hoffman, who created this practice of CBSD and wrote this paper, like whose model is it anyway? Because I think at the end of the day, we were doing a lot of community-based system dynamics engagements, but many of them were not leading to this ownership of the outcome or like the ownership of the process and the model that happened from it. And so a lot of the projects were not necessarily, having the impact that he intended. And so he talks a lot about Paul Meehl and this idea of theory specification and the fact that, even in our models, we need to go up the chain from just having a theory to testing it, to making observations about it, testing it again, and then bringing that back down through inferential statistics. And then he talks a lot about how even just in this process of doing that, there's different parties that have ownership of a model at different times. Like when you're doing model expansion, that might be very high in terms of participation in what you do with other people. But when you simplify a model and you reduce it and you try to integrate and specify it, sometimes folks lose sight of what the actual model was. So I know this is the Oceanic chapter, and I'm curious, does anyone know that thing on the right bottom on the screen? Have you all played with that, seen that? Is that like a universal thing or is that okay? I'm seeing some like shaking of heads. So this is a very American thing, and P, really? I'm
Bit of
so
both.
shocked.
Bit of both.
I see Justin nodding or shaking his head. Okay, I guess I have to explain this. So this is not a boundary object for us. Well, let me explain what a boundary object is, and then I'll talk about what that is. So a boundary object is supposedly this visual, tangible representation. It could be text, a diagram, or a formal process. And basically, it helps you create meaning and eventually leads to action. If everyone's holding this quote boundary object, then eventually you'll get to some sort of action. So that's from the Starr and Geismer in 1989. And then Laura Black has done a lot of work on boundary objects. Maybe you know that. But I like to think of in like a physical term, boundary objects being like this parachute thing that you see in this gym class, this very American gym class with the flag in the back. Where in our gym classes, I think most of us had this opportunity where the gym teacher goes and you get out a game and the game is like the parachute game. Everyone's so excited about it because it's like interactive, it's fun, everyone participates. But they unfold this huge parachute, and then every kid is supposed to grab a corner of this parachute, which is the boundary object. And as the class goes, you listen to the teacher, and she'll tell you to like wave, flap, or whatever. And then there's air that comes underneath this boundary object, and then kids are supposed to run underneath it and grab the other side. And essentially, like you could play a game where the boundary object is supposed to move from one side of the gym to the other side of gym using these kind of techniques of like running underneath the entire thing and then holding it again. So What a boundary object does is it allows us to all have kind of a same frame of mind as we're moving a model from the beginning stages to the end of, testing and implementation. But often what happens with these boundary objects is that people lose sight of it and they forget, or their participation is not as deep as it could be. And so by the end, if you're thinking of the boundary object as a parachute that needs to go from one side of the gym to the other, if there's 10 people and 5 of them don't have a hold of the boundary object by the end, only the 5 people that remain really have an understanding of what that means. And that's probably not going to lead to as much impact as if everyone had some sort of understanding of what it was. So sorry for using a example that no one really understood. Well, be a few of us. So this kind of boundary object idea is also expressed in Cash et al. And he uses the boundary object to talk about sustainable development and how important it is to have decision makers have this boundary object in mind from the beginning to the end. And he talks about 3 different constructs, which will be kind of undergirding the work that I share now, about salience, credibility, and legitimacy. So these are the 3 things that he thinks and proposes are necessary for sustainable change. And salience is this idea that the work that you're doing is relevant to the community that you're wanting to work with. It's something that they actually care about. They may have decided on their own. Credibility is about, is the model good? Is it adequate? Is it scientifically robust? Did you use data that's really strong? How would you think about the technical evidence and the arguments underneath that model? And next is legitimacy. It's the perception that the production of information has been respectful of people and their different values and beliefs, and that there's been unbiased conduct as well as inclusion of all different types of people. So these attributes are tightly coupled and kind of like that tug of war rope. Often an effort to enhance one may be incurring a cost to enhancing the others. So if you think about, like sometimes our efforts to go really deep into the science of a model might create a barrier for language in terms of the clients that we're working on. We've heard a lot of times that our words use a lot of jargon, and that's probably where that sits. So I was thinking, how do we use this to measure the robustness of our sessions that we use doing group model building with community in these CBSD sessions? And kind of came up with this quality rate rubric and this idea of using a quality radar just to visually understand how this project is actually working. So you can see this is rated 1 to 5, and then you can put this on the triangle to see kind of where your project lands. Let me make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay. And then, so we did this with the projects that we've done in the past 8 years at Skip. So on the left, you'll see overlaid onto each other different projects and different levels of quality from salience, legitimacy, and credibility. And I'm just going to go through 2 of the projects kind of a little bit more in depth so you get a sense of how we're thinking about this. And then I'll share some ideas of how we'd like to use this in the future. I'm going to pause. Anyone have thoughts or questions? Can you all hear me? We're good? Okay. I'm going to assume that you'll hop off if not. All right, so the first project I'll talk about is the one that we did a couple years ago post-COVID. And this is with the St. Louis County Children's Service Fund, which is a tax-funded organization that is required to give out some $40 million a year towards local children serving mental health issues. So this is kind of a breakdown of what they've been giving to in the past. And they came to us because they noticed that after COVID, a lot of their school-based services, which is what SBS stands for, a lot of their school-based services seem to be focused on the wrong need. They were really funding a lot of counseling, but they thought there might be other things that they could be doing differently. So they really wanted to make sure that whatever they were funding was being utilized by students. So they came to us with this problem of what they wanted to know. But then they asked us to then go to teachers and administrators and find out what they wanted to tackle, which ended up being very different from this first graph, which is like the utilization of services, and actually focusing on student mental emotional wellness and students who feel a sense of belonging. So there was like this kind of tension between even just the people who are in charge about what the problem they need to solve for is. And ultimately, the people at the county fund decided to go with whatever the administrator said because they're closest to the issue. And so really what we wanted to know then was students who feel a sense of belonging in their schools and then students whose emotional wellness is going up in schools after COVID years. So the methods we used in this particular program, we tried to be really intentional about making them robust enough to meet different types of fourth graders. That's who we had access to as fourth grade students in two different school districts. And so we spent a lot of time designing, like, what does this look like? How are we going to do it? What are the scripts we need to use? And we made special considerations about, we're going to be talking about things that are really hard for kids, especially at fourth grade. And, topics like my grandmother died from COVID is going to come up, and it surely did. So we did a lot of pre-planning on like how to address these issues. We come at it from a social work lens. And then we went ahead and did a practice session with some volunteer youth. They're probably like the nephews and poor guinea pigs of our friends and family. And we kind of changed the language, try to make it fit. And this kind of goes to this idea of credibility. You'll see on the left-hand bottom slides, I've kind of pushed whatever we were trying to go after when we did this. We did 2 sessions, and in between those 2 sessions, we learned a lot about what not to do. And so we kind of went back and forth between redesigning and adapting methods. So you can see that here. And then we did a session 3 focus group with parents or sorry, not parents, teachers and administrators. And they took the graphs and the products, these boundary objects that kids created, and tried to process them with additional information and added to that. So we essentially had 3 different sessions, one collated model, which who was collating it? It was basically our team of modelers without kids in session. And then we came up with some recommendations. There's a lot of recommendations. And so when I think about this project and like add or post hoc kind of taking the CBSD quality rubric and putting it onto that, this isn't on a scale of 10, so you're not going to see the full 10, but it's 1 to 10. And salience, I rated it a 7. Legitimacy, whether it was like inclusive or whether it was an opaque process, I rated, I think, as like a 6. And then credibility, we didn't do an actual simulation model for this one. They didn't want one necessarily, and so we just didn't do it. So I rated it a little bit lower because we gave them recommendations based off of what we thought might happen, but we weren't really sure. So that's one example of how we've kind of used that. The next example is from the St. Louis Schools Collaborative, which if you look right here, there you see Dr. David Keith, who introduced himself here on this thing. And then there's me, and then these are school leaders in St. Louis City. So it began as a informal group of district charter school leaders who were committed to improving educational outcomes for kids in the city. But if you know the subtext, which I think, Kristen, you're from St. Louis and you know the subtext of district and charter schools across St. Louis here, there's a lot of competition. And there's a lot of, yeah, just animosity between the charters and public school districts, just from historical kind of laws and various things, but also because we share the same students in terms of trying to get them to enroll in school. So over time, this particular graph here is kind of what brought this group together, is the fact that, they're fighting over students because that's what helps them run their buildings. But in general, the student population who's choosing any district or charter school is decreasing over time. So this is the dynamic problem that brought them together. But there was a lot more to that they defined was necessary to address. And so part of it was the first part. They wrote this problem statement: the system of public schools in St. Louis is struggling to meet the needs of students, maintain enrollment numbers, retain teachers. Additionally, there's low confidence in the system. And so we started with this credibility thing and just said, like, let's do a robust modeling effort. And we hired, people from MIT to come and do the modeling for us because they felt like they needed someone that was neutral, that didn't have a presence in St. Louis, to help them kind of see the big picture. And we used CBSD, semi-structured qualitative interviews, and modeling. Really focused on this idea of lived experience experts, and then talked to about 193 different people about what their experiences were like living in the city. And we did this by going into parks. We canvassed in, we have Aldi's. I don't know if that's relevant to you all, but Aldi's parking lots. Basically, it's the local grocery store that sells food in different neighborhoods. I think I'm hearing some back. I don't know if, okay. And then yeah, we took all this data and basically tried to coalesce it into different kinds of meaning. And do you hear that? Is it just me? Okay. And then we had some results. So I'm going to fly through this because I've already presented this and I'm happy to share it with you in other places. But we made some design choices. So instead of having community members draw the maps themselves, we did some interviews and then took that information and drew it into a model. We did use the quotes that people talked about to help us understand the model theory. So there on the left side in italics, you'll see like different quotes from like teachers or parents. And essentially, we came up with a pretty robust model that school leaders felt like that hits the nail on the head. They felt like this was actually cathartic to see because they could see kind of the greater system happening to them, and it made them not feel so much animosity towards each other, but definitely felt like they could work together. And then we went to this computational system dynamics modeling process, which took that model and then started to build, stock flows, and basically based off the capability trap, created these different methods for modeling. So we took this back to them. We made an interface and had them figure out where they would like to focus. So this is at an actual school with different SLPS and charter school leaders. They're all together in a room and they're saying, where should we focus? They came up with different interventions they'd like to make to the system. So you see things like combining schools, pausing new school openings, or improving parent-educator relationships, et cetera. And then we tried experiments and we showed them in real time what happens when they try to flip on different switches. So I'm happy to share this. It's already documented in other presentations, so I'm not going to go too much in depth with that. But we also, there's no excuse. We had all the money at our fingertips to be able to do all the things. So we created some videos. We tried to socialize this with as many people as possible. And at the end, it was really promising to hear some reflections from some of the school leaders who felt like this project was really useful for them. I'm just going to read one. It surprised me that almost nothing changed by activating the levers that are somewhat within our control. So using a modeling technique actually wasn't super inspiring to them, they felt like, because in the end of the day, they felt like they had to work together to actually change things. But then, the main takeaway was that they needed an intense coordinated strategy, which kept them all at the table. So they still meet to this day. They're still working on stuff. But taking this through the quality rubric, you'll see that it doesn't fully fill out the triangle like I would have hoped it would have. And this is me self-grading. So, we have salience, which is like, was this a common issue that was actually relevant to people's needs? Like, definitely. I think everyone felt like this was something that they wanted to tackle together and they couldn't do it alone. In terms of credibility and like the logic and the use of data and norms, it was scientifically robust. We replicated all sorts of confidence building tests, historical data, the whole thing, used a lot of data. But then in terms of legitimacy, I think that's where folks felt like maybe, well, they weren't included at the drawing table, or they weren't included at the time where it was intervention development time. And so I think for some folks, they kind of felt left out. And so I rated that a little bit lower. And to me, when I reflect back on this project, it just gives me a little bit of information about what we could have done differently. So going back to this idea of a quality rubric, I'm looking at the time. For me, when I see this visually, it's really helpful to me to know, like, okay, which projects did we actually do kind of a more robust job with, and what did it take to get there? You'll see there's one on here called, Dave, you'll laugh at this one, Dynamic Cities, because this is a brand new project that we're working on that has not had a lot of engagement with anyone at all. And so we're kind of sitting in this like really robust modeling space, but has no salience or legitimacy to anyone outside of ourselves. That's where kind of some of the ways that we can think about this work happens. But I thought about different ways to use this framework. And first is, I'm visual. So like thinking about this in terms of layered time dimensions. So to reflect the right course of your process, you could do it at different phases of a project to see like, how is this changing over time? The other way that I've thought about using this framework is to survey many, many different people that have been parts of this project and to understand where they felt like the project was strong or where it came short, and to layer them all together just so that we can see, where are we kind of missing from a process perspective, some critical stakeholder groups. And then the last is just like developmental uh, frameworks for like reflection. So using with the core team, the core modeling team or the CBS team to drive discussion about improvement. So this is just one step towards being a little bit more scientific about whether CBSD or what about CBSD is leading to change. There's a paper in Frontiers, which I love, that Andrew Brown is on it. I don't know if, and Stephen Allender, I know they're Oceania folks, and they're in Melbourne, I want to say. But you know, they talk about this need, this kind of gap of we say a lot about why CBSD is so transformational and so great, but there's not been a lot of testing around kind of what makes it great or what actually leads to change. And so they propose, you know, to do this, and so does, you know, Etienne Rouet. So there's not a lot that's been done here, but I think there's a lot of hope for the field to grow. So in terms of the next space, I'm going to pause for a second, just leave time for questions or thoughts before we start on kind of what we're doing next. So I'm going to hopefully, if you have something that you'd like to share or comment, go ahead and chat it or come off mute.
So Saras, those three dimensions, they're still they're all being measured on the modeler's side, or are they the participants scoring?
So I did it on my side, but I think one step in the right direction would be to have everyone have an opportunity to measure that, because I think those perspectives will be different for sure. And so that idea of like overlaying them too would be useful.
I have a
Oh,
Oh, you're on mute.
sorry, that was my fault. I muted him too excitedly.
Thanks, Juan.
okay, no worries. Do you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay. My question is, yes, having the participation of stakeholders and specifically lived experience in the modeling process, which I think brings more than the modeling result and the insight from the result. The collaboration happens in the process is much more important. But at the end, I'm interested in to hear what you have done regarding the use of model after the project. I mean, at the end, you can create an online dashboard people can use, but do you have any kind of recommendation on how to make it make the model in a way that people can use it after the project? I mean, for example, we are working at the moment for youth mental health modeling at University of Sydney. We are trying to engage primary health network people to use the model for investment decisions after we deliver that, etc. So we have sites that already received insights and the project is finished, but they are interested to see if that new project coming can be tested with the model to see if it is useful or not. But we are not at the moment doing this completely systematic. Just wanted to know your thoughts on how to make it happen, and if you have any
Yeah.
experience regarding that.
So that's a great question of what do you do with the model after a project is done? I think that's what I'm hearing. And how can you make it continue to be useful to new groups? Um, that's a great question. You know, we noticed on our website when we had a link to our interface, very few people played with it, but a lot of people just went straight to the recommendations and were like, what am I supposed to do? So, and I think part of that comes with if they didn't make it, they don't understand it necessarily, the idea of a boundary object. And so one of the things we're trying to think through, and maybe that segues into this comodel.io piece is how do we make the interface more user friendly so people can interact with the model? Right now, it's a bunch of toggles. You don't really know what's changing. You don't know the structure behind it. And so you could do that work of figuring it all out because we have links there, but it's not as straightforward. So how can we use large text models maybe to even, you know, describe what's actually happening in a model versus having people have to know the conventions? I think that's a big question that I don't know. And just another note, like some of our schools wanted to use the structure of the model that was there just for their own data. And so one thing we could have done too is just have people input their own data about certain things and then try to run it for themselves and see if it still fits. It's a good question. Bill, you have a question. Thank you.
Yeah, Saras, I think for me, the challenge with all of this is separating legitimacy from, what would be an objective judgment by a bunch of SD specialists from the legitimacy of the overall project from the point of view of the stakeholders involved. So I'm interested for your take on I think the interface of that problem is moving from a group model building CLD that people have participated in and can understand at that level. Then we take that away and we build a stock and flow model. And as you say, really, we just give people back a dashboard. Is that the fundamental challenge with all of this work, really? Getting legitimacy from the perspective of stakeholders on the end result as opposed to the process. I'm not sure whether that's a very clear question, but
yeah, I think that's absolutely a good observation of just how the things are working. Right now, when we create a CLD, most people are like, okay, yes, I can follow this. And especially folks who are new to the practice, they'll say like, this is how I think. This is just representing the way I think already. And it's great because it's now a visual tool. And then once we go to stock and flows, it's like a survival analysis. There's a drop off of people who get or continue to be interested in the nuance of formal specification of equations and figuring out, which feedback loops are the most dominant and all of that. And so you then have all these people that drop off. And, we often hear on the ground, like, I just feel so dumb. Like they'll literally say, like, I don't feel smart enough to stay involved, when that's not the case. It's just that the language is different. And so I think that's really what Peter was saying when he was going all the way back 70 slides to this idea of, how much is needed for model expansion versus model specification versus model simplification. And in that original paper, he defines every term of like what is needed when, and when is it most likely that someone will drop off. I think he also describes in that paper just like the hope that people would stick along the entire process. But I think in practicalities, like I haven't figured that out. I don't, we tried to remove some of that feeling of like, I'm not smart enough by just not even engaging folks in that process. But that wasn't a great step either in terms of what you were talking about with legitimacy and from whose perspective is it a legitimate participation or not. I think it's a good question you're posing. Like this idea of from what perspective you sit might be a different feeling of whether or not you rate something high or low, which is, I think, getting back to Dave's question of, who's filling this out. I think everyone should fill it out. And if people don't feel like everything's overlying each other, then, this idea that, stakeholder perspectives, you can use different parties to see where they feel, what they feel is strong in the process or short. I think that's a learning moment too, of like, what could we do differently so that that boundary object stays a boundary object with everyone.
And that on that project, which I was involved with, the early, which one was it? SLSC.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the process we followed, Bill, was word for word what you just said, right? Which we had this very great engaged qualitative process, but then when it came to the time to build the model, it took time, and that had to happen in a back room. And then we suddenly reappeared a couple of months later with a model.
yeah,
And things that, 3 or 4 feedback loops that they'd identified had to be collapsed into one mechanism or something. And then that ownership over the structure sort of goes away. It was very interesting to sort of try and explicitly move. It's the first time I'd ever been involved in a project where we explicitly tried to do sort of every stage from qualitative through to full simulation, all in the same project.
So I guess for me, what we're really talking about with these sorts of projects is the role of a model in our theory of change. So it's not, we're focused on the model, but the stakeholders are focused on the change. And so I love this framework, the legitimacy, credibility, and salience. I wonder should be applied more generally to the project as a theory of change rather than just the model.
Great point. Yeah, great point. I think from beginning to end, I think there's definitely places where people might feel a little more strongly about certain parts of this than others. That's a great point. And that's, I hope we start using stuff like this to actually, you know, I got really excited thinking about this rubric in a way that I don't know. I'm not a big measurement person, but I loved the idea of being able to qualify like, okay, so if we had a project where maybe we rated everything like, you know, with different variants, and then we had like multiple 20, 30 different projects, and then we could test, you know, by the numbers, like it wouldn't be exactly like an RCT, but we could see like, okay, which projects had impact and which didn't, and then which ones were strong on what. Like, I think that could be super helpful for our field to know like what matters when, and how much, to actually making change. And I think going to Dave's comment about, you know, we lost the boundary object during the simulation modeling part in terms of having everyone have ownership of it. I think one thing that held the group together though was this 18-month process. They were meeting and talking and building trust along the way. And so that like co-flow of trust was really, really strong. So that even though they didn't see what was happening, they trusted Dave and his, you know, previous work, the way he showed up, the credentials that he had, the fact that we did a lot of work on the credibility side and could show them like, here's where all the evidence lives and here's where this model lies now. I think that really helped. I think if we didn't do some of these other pieces too, it might have been something that definitely kind of fell to the wayside. Okay, I'm going to move to the next piece just because I want to make sure we have time to get there. So one of the things that we really struggled with, well, one of the things we've struggled with in the past is just this idea of, you know, who owns the model, who gets to draw. I think Dr. Peter Hovman talks a lot about like who gets to hold the marker in a group model building process. And that transfer of ownership is really, really important because it gives people agency. When they get to draw the model themselves, they get to put, you know, pen to paper and say, this is what's connected to what. There's a level of ownership that people feel to a model that they don't have whenever they are just watching someone passively do it. So one thing we tried to create in this virtual world, especially after COVID shutdowns and a more like work from home culture, was a product that would also not just draw CLDs with people, but use AI to help us get beyond this blank page syndrome. So I'm going to share it with you. It's a free tool that we were just using on ourselves. You can access it online at comodel.io. And we'll kind of go through a process together. But before we do that, if you want to go ahead and type in this particular website, we can show what it looks like in real time, and then we can go through a project together if we have enough time. So you're going to go to tinyurl.com and then type in Oceania co-model. And then I'm going to stop sharing this in a second when folks feel like they're ready.
And it's
And then
asks
I'll
us
move
to log
to the other
in
one.
at that point.
Oh yeah. If you want to log in, go ahead. If you do not feel comfortable logging in because we will see the back end, then don't do it and we'll just demonstrate it for you here. But ideally someone will log in. So it's not, well, there's someone in there. Yep, that's great. So this is the back, like this is kind of a not done model per se, but it's one that I've worked on. And simple example, decoding road rage. So I use this AI assistant to draw up a problem statement. I put some knowledge in it, some existing knowledge that I had on my own that the internet does not have, ideally. And then I told it to draw a model, and this is kind of what it came up with. The cool thing about this is, can you wiggle your cursor again, Dave? So the idea is that you can use this in real time with friends. Maybe Dave disagrees with something that I put up there. He thinks there needs to be something else, some variable. Like he would go and say, you know, this is what I think is missing. Draw it in real time. Drinking. Good. Drinking leads to what?
Mm, mm.
I didn't tell you I was going to make you do this
Yeah,
in
you
real time.
didn't pre-warn me that I was going to be
No,
involved
there's the
in
arrow
this.
right here.
How
You
do I
need a
do it?
cursor right here. Yep, there you
Okay,
go. And then if you wanted to change the polarity, you just, you know, click on the polarity and then push, you know, minus or something, change it to what you want to say. And then you would say, this is what's happening. One thing we
More
love about
drinking's
this.
more accidents.
Oh yes, drinking causes more accidents, which causes more what? Not just policy enforcement. There's a ton
ultimately
missing, right?
causes
That's the
more
point.
road rage and driver stress, which then leads to more drinking.
Oh yes, that's right. That's a great point.
Okay.
It's been a
There we
hard
go.
day. I am not sure I want to be, yes. That's a great point. So then you start kind of messing with these, and we can talk about these in real time. The other cool thing is if you push on the white space and then do the /, you can type to chat. So I can tell you what I think is wrong in real time, but you don't have to be on Zoom to do it. The other thing that we wanted to build in here was just, we share a lot of models with people, but when you see the big spaghetti, you get a little overwhelmed. So we have this unfold function. Sorry, if someone could just stop pushing for a second, I'll show you what it looks like, and you can just unfold and then change the orders in which you want to even demonstrate maybe how some of this is working. So like, for instance, if I think B1 should be up here, then I might unfold that first. So this is what it looks like at the end. It's kind of cool. We like to use it with folks who want to start learning how to model, like want to do it, but aren't really sure if they're doing it right. And then they start playing around, and it kind of gives a very non-threatening space for them to do this. If we wanted to use the AI assistant, I'll show you what that looks like. Okay. This is the first screen you would come up with. So blah, blah, blah. Co-model helps you work with others to visualize, understand, and improve complex systems. Is there a topic or specific question you'd like to dive into? Anyone have a complex problem they are trying to solve right now? Type it in the chat or yell it out loud.
Housing affordability.
Okay.
Oh, you already
Anyone?
got that there. Sorry, I didn't even read that.
No, it's okay. Let's do it. Turn that into a specific question or problem statement.
Why is housing so expensive in Australia?
All right. I'm just going to push enter, see what happens. This is operating off of ChatGPT 4 point something. And we programmed it to tell us, like, to help us describe a problem statement better. So it sounds like you're concerned with housing process in Australia. To start, could you help me craft a concise problem statement? For example, would you agree with something like, and they state it differently. Let me know if that works or if you'd like to adjust it. Do you like that? Do you like how it's stated, Dave? Okay.
Fine, it's good.
Say
Yep.
yes. Let's go for it. And then great, so we'll use this problem statement. And then now, can you share any background information that you might have regarding this issue? So this is where you could add interviews or, text, like different things that you know exist. Is there something that you know about this that may be relevant? Dave or anyone?
Population or population growth.
Population, sorry?
Growth.
Is affecting housing prices?
Yeah. So,
Anything else?
so Sarah in the chat said negative gearing, which is a tax policy in Australia. Construction costs.
Construction costs,
Well.
yeah. Lack of supply.
Okay, so I'm just going to stick that in there as stuff we already kind of know. And it's going to use co-model will use ChatGPT to kind of create a first draft for you. And it'll be obviously wrong. It's going to be wrong. There's nothing in it this is the whole, like, all models are wrong, but some are really wrong. This is the really, really, really wrong. Okay, but now you have some variables that are kind of pre-populated into a CLD where you can start looking and drawing and saying, like, is this true? And if I saved it to my thing and then gave you all chat access by having you click on that link in the chat, you can go and use this same model to make changes if you wanted to in real time. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, what we're building this, we're not sure what we're doing with it. We're just using it for our own purposes, but we've made it available to many people, knowing that, we'll get better when we share information. And so I think, Kareem, you're on here. I heard your voice. I'm assuming that was you.
I'm here.
Yes, Kareem. So one thing we've been doing with Stella is just getting feedback from them and also kind of sharing code and saying, like, can you help us figure out how to draw these things better, because you're better at doing it through Stella at IC Systems. And so now they have functionality where you could do this also within their software. And we're just learning from each other because this is kind of a new frontier. I feel some feelings about it too, just knowing what AI's impact is, and even just this idea of, like, boundary objects, like, whose model is this really, if the computer generated it first. So I'm going to
So
stop there. You all can,
does
you
that
know,
affect
play with it.
legitimacy, Saras?
Probably, I would think it does because it's not super inclusive. It's just me, the modeler, drawing with other modelers right now. Sure. It's a good question. All right. Any thoughts or questions, or what does this bring up for you in your own work? We have about 10 minutes to discuss.
I just want to quickly say, Saras, I have loved it. I saw this work on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and I just love it. And I've been playing with it. But I think it's like useful for, well, I've used it anyway, just sort of at the initial problem stage of just for as a researcher or on a new project, just starting out, going how to visualize the problem before I even engage with other stakeholders, just to sort of get a view of the landscape, particularly if it's a topic with I've got less familiarity of.
Thank you for that feedback. Thank you. Same thing. I mean, we use it all the time when people approach us for like, hey, tell us about food insecurity. And I'm like, I know nothing about food insecurity, but I'll see what's out there already. And then you can tell me if this is right or wrong. It's a good point. That was Jackie. I think I missed who it was.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Jackie in Sydney. Hi.
Oh, hi. Any other thoughts or feelings? Could be negative feelings too. I'm a social worker. I can deal with it. Justin.
Hi, Saras. This is great. My question might betray my lack of knowledge around AI, but in terms of as a starting point, is it always the question that you ask, or could you preload it with even just a single loop that you have had and then ask it to expand on that?
Yeah, I think you could. So let me pull this back up. Yes, the answer is yes, I think, if I'm understanding you.
Yeah, so we do that, and I think you do too, Saras. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So you just X that out and then go on the right side and say, here's a problem. Like the kids are watching too much TV, too much YouTube these days. That's a problem. It's bad for their health.
Too much.
I don't know, too much. And then I might say, what knowledge do I have around this? Let's say it's algorithms are making them addictive. These videos addictive. And then how can I help? I might say make a model with at least 2 reinforcing loops and 1 balancing loop. Who knows?
You need much in your problem statement.
Not necessarily. You could literally just say, food insecurity is a problem in my community, and it'll give you a crappy model, but it'll give you something. So this one's like health impact, parental concerns lead to more video addictiveness. That's not necessarily true, I don't think. But this is where we start amending it and like really playing with it. Algorithms, time spent watching. It's come up with different variables I didn't put in there, but definitely a good starting point maybe to say like, is this true or not? And automatically I'm like, initially I wanted the whole model to look right when we first created it, but then I realized if it looks right, then people will think it's right and not play with it. So it's actually great that it doesn't look right when it first comes out, because it makes you actually think about like, is this actually true or not? But yeah.
I think it's really brilliant work. So the problem statement that we've got there actually has some subjectivity in it. It's bad for the health. So it occurs to me that this could be a great way of researching what people think about a problem to understand their mental model, or at least what ChatGPT comes up with as their mental model. So it doesn't mean that we need to accept it or believe it, but it gives us a basis on which to actually perhaps challenge the dynamics that might be in it.
That's such a great point. And it it makes the mental model explicit. And one thing that's been fascinating for us on the back end, Davidson Gerard was the person who did all the coding for this. Basically, he wasn't a system dynamicist when he met us, but he learned enough where he could create a first prototype. And part of the back end allows him to see, what are people searching? That's what you give up when you give your your Gmail, sorry. But it's really fascinating to see what people are searching, and especially how it corresponds with what news is happening at the current moment, especially in America with a new administration that is very divisive and doing a lot of things that people aren't necessarily excited about. You see them making assertions and like, okay, immigration's bad, this is happening. So yeah, for sure on that end too, as a data point, it's interesting.
There's, as far as mental models, can't they just enter their description of their mental model under knowledge and it will try to just use that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, there's so many, we've played with this in different ways. If you see this on the right side, I'm glad he fixed it. It was all coming up in Spanish yesterday. So I was like, I don't know what that is, but today it's all in English. I told him about it. But yeah, it'll give you kind of the reasoning behind why it drew the loops that it did and gives you some information on how to do that. But, this is a developing software. If you have things that you want to see in it and changes you want to make, definitely reach out. There's ways to find us through this. There used to not be, but now there are. So definitely reach out and let us know what you want to see. And I think with that, maybe I'll check the chat one last time and then. So using this to support virtual GMBs would be a valuable add. Yeah, definitely. We've found that even in person, just having their own computers in front of them, it gives everybody kind of equal space instead of having to hoard around a whiteboard to be able to kind of make, comments or say something about what they think they would like to see. It's a great point, Jackie. Okay, Dave, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Sure. Well, any more questions?
I just have one more comment. Saras, have you thought about going the other way and producing a CLD and getting ChatGPT to explain it in text, which I think would be kind of interesting way for modelers to improve their communication?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I think this part, this reasoning history, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but there's this like little bar that does that on the right side here. But I don't know if it's useful sometimes or not, but in the beginning we're like, oh, this is really great. So if I'm writing up a paper and that part where you have to explain all the loops and say like this leads to that and that leads to that, and it just takes up a lot of time. I mean, maybe there's a way to just copy and paste and pull that in, but again, we'd have to recheck everything and does it even make sense? I think that's a question for AI in general, is like, does it always make sense? But it's a good start.
Well, interestingly, you question the connection between parental concerns and video addictiveness, but it talks about it right near the bottom.
This one,
and
leaning
it justifies leading to more restrictions, which can paradoxically increase addictiveness as children find ways around restrictions.
Yeah, that's a great point. That maybe that's on some blog somewhere. Someone has written that down, and it's getting pulled in as a dynamic that is counterintuitive, which is interesting. That's a great point. Yeah, so sometimes I read this, sometimes I don't, to be honest. But that was a good call out.
Any other questions? Saras has got to go to bed. It's nearly 9 o'clock. So.
Been sleeping at 8:30, guys. It's nice to meet you all here. If you have any questions or thoughts or anything you want to share, definitely reach out. I think you can find me through that maybe initial link. I mean, I'm pretty, I would be horrible at witness protection. There's a lot of ways that you can find me. So saras@skipdesign.com. Yeah, come chat me and
you'll be at the System Dynamics conference in Boston.
I will be there. Yes.
August.
I will be
there. For those
there.
of you who can get there in person, and otherwise, yeah, we'll look forward to connecting online.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks very much, Saras. That was terrific.
Yeah.
Here.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
See you in Boston.
See ya.
Thanks, Saras.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you.